Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into something really fascinating, something right out of a Cold War thriller. It's the CIA's Bluebird operation.
Oh, wow. This is going to be good.
Yeah. So our source for this deep dive is a declassified CIA document. It's from 1951.
Okay.
And it lays out the objectives and the agencies that were involved and all the different research topics for this super secret program. It's honestly a pretty unsettling glimpse into a world where, I don't know, like the lines between science and espionage got totally blurred.
Yeah, the Cold War was a crazy time.
Yeah.
You know what really gets me about this document is how it's not just some theoretical thing. It actually lays out like a concrete plan
Right.
to use, special methods to extract information from people.
Yeah, and the Cold War was just so intense, right? Like the U.S. and the Soviet Union were in this massive battle.
Yeah, global dominance was at stake.
Exactly, and intelligence gathering was like, top priority.
Absolutely. And this document, it doesn't beat around the bush,
No, it doesn't.
Bluebird's objective was crystal clear. Obtain or protect information of vital significance.
Yeah, straight out of a spy novel.
But here's the thing.
What's that?
They wanted to use methods that could, and I quote, induce full disclosure.
Wow.
It's like ripped from the pages of a spy thriller, but it was real.
It was really happening.
And it really shows you just how worried they were about controlling information, Like, they were willing to try anything to gain an edge. Back then, everyone was paranoid about, like, brainwashing and sleeper agents.
Oh, totally.
Right.
The Manchurian Candidate, but for real.
Exactly.
Okay, so speaking of spy novels, this document reads like a casting call,
Really?
It lists field teams and support staff. It even mentions literature surveyors
What?
and pharmacologists.
No way.
They were putting together this massive scientific operation to, crack open the human mind.
Wow, that's wild. It shows you how serious they were about this whole thing. It wasn't just about traditional interrogation. They wanted a systematic, scientific approach to controlling minds.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
Totally. And then there's this panel they mention, and it doesn't give any names, but, these were like the top experts advising the program.
Oh, I bet.
Leading figures in, psychology and pharmacology and maybe even hypnosis.
Yeah, the best of the best.
All right.
Okay, but let's get to the good stuff.
Okay, what's that?
The research topics.
Oh, yeah.
This is where things get really, really interesting. Like, we're talking hypnosis, drugs, even devices that sound like they're straight out of a James Bond movie.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's crazy. The document's basically a list of questions about how to control people's minds.
Like what?
Well, for one, it asks, can accurate information be obtained from willing or unwilling individuals? But here's the key. When they say unwilling, they're talking about, forcing confessions.
Oh, wow.
Getting secrets from people who don't want to give them up. That's heavy.
It's like a seriously dark path they were going down.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
it gets even more unsettling, right? Because the document goes on to ask, can we obtain control of the future activities, both physical and mental, of any individual?
They were really going for it.
I don't know. It's like they're trying to figure out how to program people.
To act on their behalf, yeah.
Yeah. Can you imagine if they actually pulled it off?
The implications would be huge.
Huge, yeah.
It makes you think about how much power the government should have,
Totally. And how easy it is to manipulate people.
Especially during a time like the Cold War. The fear and suspicion were so high back then.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder just how far a nation would go to protect itself.
Okay, but what about these persons of interest they keep mentioning? Like, who are they actually targeting with these techniques?
Right. The document's pretty vague on that point.
Super vague.
It's unsettling, right?
Right.
Not knowing who might have been subjected to these experiments.
Totally, yeah. It's like one of the biggest mysteries surrounding this whole operation.
So we're left to speculate.
Yeah, use your imagination.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics of their research. Like, hypnosis was a big one.
Right.
The document's full of questions about, inducing actions against someone's will and post-hypnotic control, and even guaranteed amnesia.
Oh, wow, that's straight out of the Manchurian Candidate.
I know, right? It's like they were trying to make those fictional scenarios a reality.
It's chilling to think about.
And then their drugs. They were exploring all sorts of substances.
What kind?
Well, some of them were, known and controversial at the time.
Okay.
But then there are these weird ones, like Nacdron. What even is that?
Oh, that's interesting. based on their research, I'm pretty sure that nactron was just a misspelling of narcohypnosis.
Narcohypnosis.
Yeah, it's a combination of drugs and hypnosis.
Yeah.
They use it to, like, influence behavior. It was a really hot topic back then. The CIA was really interested in it, for interrogation and mind control.
It sounds like a pretty intense combo.
It is.
Speaking of combos, they also mentioned researching, like other substances, including toxins.
Toxins.
And what they call endocrine products.
Endocrine products? What are those?
Well, for those who don't know, they're hormones.
Yeah.
And they can have some pretty powerful effects on the body.
Oh, wow.
Right. Like, it makes you wonder what they were really up to. The document's not specific.
Yeah.
But it definitely hints that they were willing to experiment with all sorts of things, some of them pretty dangerous.
Right.
And, we have to remember that back then, ethical guidelines for human experimentation were way looser than they are now.
Totally different world.
Okay, so we've got hypnosis, we've got drugs, and then we get to the devices.
Oh, yeah.
This is where things get really wild.
How so?
They mention electroshock and sonic and ultrasonic devices. They even talk about this German pistol called the Scheinpot pistol. It's designed to make someone look dead.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's like something straight out of a spy movie.
Wow.
Right? It just shows you how far they were willing to go to explore these, like, uncharted territories of the mind.
It was a time of, like, incredible scientific advancement, but also intense paranoia and a blurring of ethical lines.
Yeah, for sure. And what's even crazier is that the document mentions the need to guard against countermeasures.
Countermeasures? Like what?
Well, that's the thing. It doesn't really say,
Mm.
but it makes you wonder, who are they worried about? Other nations, their own agents.
That's a great question. It's like they were playing this high-stakes game of chess, trying to stay one step ahead of everyone else.
I know. It's so mysterious and a little bit creepy, right?
Definitely.
But what really gets me about this whole document is this obsession with control.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
It's like in the language they use, in the research topics, in the whole idea of manipulating the human mind. It's not just about getting information.
Right.
It's about shaping behavior, turning people into like tools of the state.
Yeah, and that raises all sorts of ethical questions.
For sure. And those are questions that we're still dealing with today. But we'll get into that a little bit later. So we're back talking about Bluebird. You know what else I found really interesting?
What's that?
It's the part where they talk about detecting if someone has already been, conditioned.
Oh, yeah, like brainwash?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
It's like they knew that this type of manipulation was possible, and they were already thinking about ways to, like, counter it.
It's like a psychological arms race.
Right. Like they're trying to develop mind control techniques while also worrying about someone using those same techniques against them.
It's a bit like, developing a virus and the antidote at the same time.
Exactly. And this is where things get really tricky. They mention safeguarding against these countermeasures, but they don't really go into detail about what those might be.
Yeah, it's kind of a cliffhanger.
It is.
What do you think about that?
Well, it leaves us with a lot of questions, right? Like, were they afraid of other countries developing similar mind control programs? Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Or were they maybe worried about their own agents being turned?
Oh, that's a good point.
The document doesn't say, but the fact that they were thinking about countermeasures at all, it shows they knew how dangerous this stuff could be.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
Definitely.
But even with all these unanswered questions, I think we can still learn a lot from this document,
What do you mean?
Well, it gives us this, like, inside look at a time when the lines between science and ethics and national security were really, really blurred.
You're right. It was a different world back then. And, it's not just about the history.
What do you mean?
Well, think about the implications for today. We live in a world with all this advanced tech, facial recognition, AI, targeted advertising. It's kind of like the stuff Bluebird was trying to do, but on a much larger scale.
Wow. You're right. It's like this document is a warning from the past,
Exactly. We need to be careful about how these technologies are used because they can be misused really easily.
Yeah, it's a bit unsettling to think about.
Definitely. But that's why it's so important to be aware of this stuff, We need to be vigilant and critical and ask the tough questions.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about the goals of Bluebird, the agencies involved, the research topics, but what about the results? Did they actually succeed in controlling minds?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And this document doesn't really give us the answer.
Oh, man.
But, Based on what we know about later CIA programs like MKUltra, which was basically a continuation of Bluebird,
Okay.
it seems like they kept pursuing these goals for years.
So Bluebird was just the tip of the iceberg.
That's a very real possibility.
It's a lot to take in, honestly.
It is.
But that's what makes this document so interesting, you know? It forces us to think about these uncomfortable truths about the past and the ethics of scientific progress.
Absolutely. We have to learn from history so we don't repeat the same mistakes.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the biggest takeaway from this deep dive into Bluebird?
I think the most important thing is to remember that the past isn't really over. It's stay with us, shaping the world we live in today.
You're right. Like the questions raised by Bluebird about control and ethics and the limits of science, those are all things we're still dealing with today.
Exactly. And they're questions that will probably keep challenging us for a long time to come.
This has been a seriously eye-opening deep dive, and I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure, really.
And to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning.
That's the best way to understand the world around us.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with something to think about. We've talked a lot about mind control and manipulation, but what about the opposite? What about the human ability to resist control, to think for ourselves?
That's a great point.
To hold on to our individuality, even when there's so much pressure to conform. That's something I think we should all be thinking about, especially in today's world.
I agree. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always hope.
Absolutely. All right, well, that's it for a deep dive into Bluebird. Stay curious, and we'll catch you next time. As we're going through this Bluebird stuff, one thing that really jumps out at me is the language.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's so, clinical, Like they call people persons of interest.
Right.
And talk about controlling future activities as if they're just like lab rats.
It's dehumanizing, for sure.
Totally. It reflects a mindset, where people are seen as objects.
Yeah, things to be studied and categorized and controlled.
Exactly. And that's what makes the ethical side of this so troubling.
Absolutely. Even if they believed it was for national security,
right,
the potential for abuse is huge.
It is. And that's where the whole conversation about ethics gets really complicated, doesn't it?
It does.
It's like, how do you balance security and individual rights?
It's a question that's been around forever.
Yeah, and there are no easy answers.
Nope. This document is definitely a warning sign, though.
Oh, totally.
Even with the best intentions, research can go wrong.
And have unintended consequences.
Definitely. Absolutely. It shows how important transparency and oversight are, especially in sensitive research like this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we've covered a lot about Bluebird, the goals, the agencies, the research topics, and how it all connects to today.
It's been a fascinating look, for sure.
A little unsettling, too.
Yeah, definitely. But it's important to understand these things.
Totally. So what would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from all this?
I think the biggest thing is to never stop thinking critically. Question everything, don't take things at face value, and dig deeper into these complex issues.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Always be questioning and, be aware of how scientific progress can be used for good or bad.
Exactly.
So if anyone wants to learn more about Bluebird, where should they go?
There are lots of resources online, declassified documents, articles by historians,
Okay, cool.
Just remember to be critical of your sources, though.
Right. Consider their perspective.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into Bluebird. It's been great talking with you.
Same here. Always a pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us. Keep those minds curious, and we'll see you on the next dive.